This video explains how to set up a simple command line application that makes requests to the YouTube Analytics API library using Python. So let me search that up real quick. I'm going to say YouTube API. You should see a few results here in a second. If you search for just YouTube API, you're going to get YouTube Data API, YouTube Analytics API, YouTube Reporting API, and then there's other kind of like Embed API and stuff. Altogether, there's 4 results. So it's a little bit confusing, right? So what we're going to do in this video, we're going to look at specifically at the Data API and we're going to look at the Analytics API. But I'm going to give you a comparison between the 3 of them. And the reason I want to do that, let me talk a little bit about why I'm doing this video, right? So Google's API, they update quite often. It updates from time to time. And when I first did this, I believe 2 to 3 years ago, I took notes and I kept them in my notes. And earlier this afternoon, when I tried to reproduce the steps in my notes to build out a YouTube Analytics tool, I realized that I was getting caught in a few changes that YouTube has made since onto the OAuth side of things, especially on the OAuth side of things, and also a few other API changes. So to remind future me, I created a video instead, this time following what is still true, or rather what is true at least at this point of May 2022. So by the time we're done, we're gonna have a fancy command line application that fetches our channel statistics. So we're gonna get like the number of subscribers, we're gonna get the number of videos and stuff, how many views are there on our channels, on our uploads, all of that. And we're going to get the channel statistics, reporting, key metrics, all directly from Python itself. All right, so we built a Python tool to do that. And we're going to try and explore the YouTube Data API v3, and we're going to use the YouTube Analytics API. This will allow the user to retrieve information on a YouTube channel. So here it says retrieve your YouTube Analytics data. And this is gonna allow you to query for any kind of things. So for example, you want to search for a keyword. You want to say, like, if I type machine learning into the YouTube search box, what are the most popular channels that got returned? You know, you can do that from YouTube Data API. So any kind of public data on YouTube, you can query that using the YouTube Data API v3. This is more commonly, these two, reporting API and analytics API, these two are more commonly used by YouTube channel creators themselves. So people who own the channel and they want to find out a little bit more about the, how the channels are performing, and they want a nice API to query for that data. So as a quick note, this video we're gonna be quite comprehensively reviewing these 2 main approaches, the Analytics API and the Data API, to work with Google's YouTube API. And the first half of the video, we're gonna look at how we use Analytics API to go through an authorization flow. So anyone could authorize the application to, meaning we try to get the user's permission to access data that isn't public. And then the second half of the video, we're going to use an API key to retrieve data that are already public. For example, YouTube searches, results, snippets, channel information, any information that are already public. So there is no authorization flow, and that's kind of it. And right now, I'm going to switch over to my terminal. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the prerequisites, okay, the installations and stuff. So first of all, the APIs that we're going to interact with, we're going to use the library that is, I guess, is by Google, but those will require Python 3.5 and above. So with that, you could just create a new virtual environment if you want to. If you don't know what I'm doing here, use your own virtual environment tools. If you're using PyEnv, if you're using RochoEnv, if you're using VENV, the WENV, you can do any of those, right? But I'm gonna just use virtual environment wrapper. So in my case, I'm gonna just say make virtual environment to create a new environment, and I'm gonna just give it a name. I'm gonna call it Google Analytics, or I'm gonna call it YouTube, all right? And now that it's created, I'm gonna go ahead and just activate that. So that's already activated by default. So YouTube, if I search for that, search which Python 3, it should show me. All right, that's cool. It's now in my I'm in the YouTube virtual environment. And then now what I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna go ahead and install in one fell swoop, install 3 things that I need for this tutorial. So that would just be Google API Python CLI, and then so this is the Google API Python client, and then Google OAuth lib and Google auth HTTP lib2. So this OAuth lib is the first part of the video. I'm gonna, the kind of workflow we're gonna create is gonna involve the end user who is using our tool to authenticate and authorize the access to that person's channel. All right, so that person have to authorize the channel, because if not, you're just fetching all kind of private information using the API. That's not good, right? So you want to say that, hey, you want to use the tool, sure, it pops up something nice and it says, hey, go ahead, authenticate that for me. And if you authenticate that, then it's going to return the permission, and the results are going to be queried and returned back to you. And the second part of it, when we're using an API, we don't really need this, but let's just do everything in one instead of having to rerun this flow. So I'm going to go ahead and say that. And when that's done, let me just do a pip list. Okay, so I have the Google auth. Just as a reminder, the Google API All right, so there's the Google API Python client. This is the Google's API's client library for Python. So all of the API and stuff, when you read the documentation and ask you to run some code here, they're just gonna assume that you have the Google API Python client installed already. And then there's the Google OAuth, and then there's the auth lib, this set of things here. That's for user authorization. Okay, that's for user to authorize, to authenticate, to authorize, and say, okay, you have permission to access my channel to collect statistics from my channel. So that's it. That's step 1. It's pretty easy, huh? And now we're gonna go into step 2. All right, step 2, we're gonna hop over to Google Cloud Platform. So let me open that up. And so this is basically just console.cloud.google.com, and you just put a /APIs after that, right? So console.cloud.google.com/APIs is gonna bring you to the dashboard. And depending on how you set up your Google Cloud Console, you may have a few things already, you may have nothing. So I'm not gonna show you all of my workspaces here, but if you don't have one, you just have to create a new one, new project. So click on this one and then click create a new project. So do that, and then there is a new project, click on new project, and then from there, give it a name and just do that. If you're not in any organization, that's fine, you don't have to be one, but I'm currently in the algorithm.ma organization, so that's where I'm gonna create my projects. And then once I've done that, you want to move into library, and in library it says welcome to the API library, and that's a ton on the sidebar. You will find an API for almost every service under Google's umbrella of services, right? So click on machine learning, you see all kind of AI platform training, prediction API. We may get to try this in other videos in the future. For now though, right, we're just gonna stick to what we came here for. So we're gonna type YouTube in here, and here it's gonna give you a few results. It's gonna say YouTube embed API data API v3. You can just hit enter, and there will be 4 results here. And if you feel like they sound a little bit too similar, let me give you a quick comparison. So data API, if I click on this, I'm in the data API. If I do a quick search and I search for resource types, right? Let me click on that. It says here, this is the data API that we're gonna use to query for things like activity, channel banner, channel section, all kind of stuff. Actually, search result even. So that's gonna be useful if we want to find, for example, want to search for. Want to find a tutorial on how to do, let's say, how to work with Google Cloud Platform. And we wonder if we go to YouTube and type that query into search engine, into the YouTube search engine, we said Google Cloud Platform. We want to see what kind of channels return results, or what kind of videos came back on the results page, right? So that's what you can do with search results. And then there's a subscription, there's a thumbnail, there's a video, there's a watermark, there's all kind of things here. So using data API, you're pretty much fetching all of these data that are already public. None of these are private information. None of these are data that needs to be authorized by the video owner or video creator. So those are when you could use the data API. But what about the analytics API? So what about this analytics API and the reporting API? Now to show you the comparison, I'm gonna go into this page and I'm gonna search for, let's say, choose, I believe the right. Okay, here, that's the one. So here you give you a comparison here, choose the right API for our application. So you want to use the analytics API if you're trying to get some real-time targeted queries to generate custom YouTube analytics reports. If you're building some sort of SaaS, some sort of software as a service, some web app that allows the user to sort of provide authorization and then fetch some analytics and display them, then you want to use the YouTube analytics API. This already provides filtering and sorting parameters, so the calling application does not need to natively support this function. So what it means by that is that you don't have to implement the filtering logic in your code, whether it's in JavaScript or in Python. You can just call it directly, and the API, since it provides you those facilities, you can just use the API to do the filtering directly, and it will just return exactly what you search for, right? And each API request specifies the date range for which data will be returned. It will also enable you to retrieve weekly and monthly data sets. So as such, the calling application does not need to store, retrieve datasets or aggregate statistics across data ranges. So you don't even have to coin pandas and do all kind of aggregation stuff. You can use the API to do that. So this is what we're going to explore. But the other one is YouTube reporting API. And here, the reporting API specializes in bulk reports. So it says it retrieves bulk reports containing YouTube analytics data, is designed for applications that can import large data sets and provide tools to filter, sort, and mine that data. So unlike analytics API, where you would expect the API to handle all of that filtering, sorting, and stuff, your reporting API is just gonna give you all of the entire the large data sets, and then you have to be the one that build the front end tools to do this kind of like filtering, sorting, and mining of the data. All right. Each report contains a predefined set of fields. Developers use the API to schedule reporting jobs, each of which identifies a report that YouTube should generate. YouTube then generates a daily report that can be asynchronously downloaded. So reporting API is kind of more powerful in a way, but it's also a little bit more overkill in our sort of our demo app. So we're probably gonna just stick to Analytics API. All right. So that's what we're gonna use. So I want you to click into Analytics API. So click on that. This is actually, a lot of this workflow has completely been revamped in 2022. I mean, if you're watching an earlier video from 2020, 2021, you won't see all of this because they have made a very big revamp. So I have some screenshots from the old ones, but they're not relevant anymore. So this is a more updated walkthrough of how to use the Analytics API. Now, if you came to this as a new user, you won't have to manage. Instead, you will have activate or something. So I already enable, or you would have enable. So your button would say enable, not manage. But me, I already enabled that. So now it say API enabled. But you would see an enable. It's also a blue button, but it's just, instead of saying manage, it would just be enable. All right. So I want to click on that. Once you click enable, it should bring you to this page where you now have the YouTube Analytics API, and then you have a few other things down here, or you may have nothing because you just started. But what we need to do is to just hop onto the credentials tab. Okay, so hop on the credentials tab. And again, you may have nothing in here, but that's fine. I'm not gonna use any of that. I'm gonna do it with you from scratch. So I'm gonna call it create credentials. And here there is the API key and OAuth client ID. We're actually gonna use both of them. We're gonna first use the OAuth client ID, and then we're gonna use the API key. All right. Now, the OAuth client ID requests user consent so your app can access the user's data. So this is what I mean by that. There are a portion of the data that you can query from YouTube. They are going to actually be private. They're actually only going to be available to the channel owner himself or herself. All right. So the channel, the guy who owned the channel or the girl who owned the channel, that person has statistics that you do not have. For example, the amount of private unpublished videos, you know, those things are not public by default, right? And by definition, they're private videos in the first place. So those things like that, right? Like the amount of comments that are not being replied, the amount of watch hours, how many watch hours, meaning how many hours have have this person accumulated, have this person's video accumulated over the last 1 year, for example. So over the last 1 year, if many people have been watching the same videos on the channel, then you will have a high number of watch hours. That requires you to request for user consent so that your app can access the user's data. API key is a little bit more different, and that's something that we're going to talk about in the second half of this video. So we're not going to worry about that now. Just click on OAuth client ID. So click on that, and once you're in here, it will ask you to create an OAuth client ID. It says that this is used to identify a single app to Google's OAuth servers. All right, so here there are a few options. You have web application, Android, Chrome app, iOS, TVs, desktop app, and UWP. If you read YouTube's official documentation, it would ask you to pick others, but there is no others anymore. So the documentation is not updated, but I mean, up to today, I'm still looking at the documentation and it's still telling you to pick others for the tutorial, but there is no others. I tried web application and it wasn't very smooth, so I picked desktop app and it was working. So this is what I'm gonna go for. I'm gonna say desktop app, and I'm gonna give it a quick demo. I'm gonna make this very obvious to me that I'm calling it TAM, because this is what it means to me is that I'm gonna have to delete this key, because I'm gonna show you everything I do here. So you will see my API key, and that's not good practice. So I'm gonna delete all of this when the demo is done. All right. So I'm gonna make it TAM to make it very obvious to me that it's just completely temporary. All right. And I'm gonna say TAM YouTube demo. I guess that will work. And I'm gonna say create. And now you have your client ID. Remember, this is client IDs and secrets. These are things that you don't want to be on your version control. You don't want to be on anywhere online on GitHub repo, right? So you want to make sure that if you do that in the Visual Studio Code, what I'll show you is I'll use the .env method to hide them and to make sure you don't commit them accidentally. But for you, you can choose any workflow so long as you're aware that these are your private secret and client ID. You don't want them to be anywhere online, all right? So you don't want this to be leaked out or to be exposed. And it goes without saying that you also don't want to hard code this value in the Python code, except if you're running this locally and you never plan to push them anywhere else. That's fine. But if you plan to commit this out to GitHub, you never want to put this into plain file into a plain site on your Python script. All right, so you want to omit from that. Let me just copy the client ID and client secret. But I'm also going to be able to just download JSON, so I'm going to do that now. So click on download JSON, and it's going to ask you where do you want to have this. All right, so I'm going to put them in my desktop temporarily. Going to name it desktop tam.json. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to save that now, and now it's downloading, and now it's done. So with this, we can now go to our Visual Studio Code, and we'll move this to I guess the library API. Maybe not this one, maybe this one. We keep this somewhere in the corner of the screen. but we're gonna be working directly from Visual Studio Code now. All right. So first step, I'm gonna create a directory. I'm gonna call it YouTube demo API, and I'm gonna just change directory to, actually no, I'm not gonna do that. And then I'm gonna make sure that I move the file. So I'm gonna move the client secret desktop tam, and I'm gonna move that into my YouTube demo API. Now if we list the file, we should see client secret desktop tam.json. And if you wanna, you can just cat and just print that out. Let me show you that client secret, and that would give you the client ID. That's what you have there. So all of this information, we don't need that. We're gonna clear the screen, and then we're gonna try to activate the environment that we're in. I'm gonna be in YouTube, so work on YouTube, clear the screen. If you do a pip list now, you should just still confirm that all of the things that you just installed at the beginning of the video, the Google API core, Google auth, all of that is still in there. All right, that's cool. I'm gonna clear the screen now, and I guess we can just go ahead and create a file now. We're just gonna call it YouTube, and we're gonna call it authenticate. Okay, so YouTube authenticate. We're gonna say enter, and now we can just open our file. So Control-1, or just click on open folder, and then go to desktop, YouTube demo API, and okay. It should relaunch the Visual Studio Code for you. Still make sure that everything still works. And then within YouTube auth.py, this is the file that you just created. There's nothing in here. That's cool. And here we're gonna do a few imports. Okay, so I won't waste your time. I'm gonna just copy and paste some of the stuff that you can find from a documentation anyway. I'm gonna select interpreter first and move this onto YouTube. All right. So these are stuff that you'll find on the Google's own documentation anyway. I'm just trying to streamline it and not make it too much, and then I can explain it line by line. Instead of having you spend time watching me typing out each line of the code, I'm just gonna try and copy and paste some of this in here. And what we're gonna do is, this scopes is particularly important. We're gonna talk about that. Right now we just need a read only from the YouTube analytics, and then from there we said that we want to access the service. What service? YouTube analytics. And which API version are we using? V2. All right, so that's the second version of that. And then we're gonna have a client services file. So client services, not services file, but secrets file. So we're gonna have client secrets file, and within client secrets file, all of these are gonna be sort of like constant. So that's why I'm putting them in caps, meaning we're never gonna modify them. We're never gonna, these are pretty much immutable by the developer's logic. All right, and from this client secrets file itself, you wanna put in this file that you downloaded, right? So you wanna copy that, or you wanna just maybe just copy the file name and paste it within this. And make sure you don't leave out the JSON file. And then the next 6 lines of codes are very standard stuff. So initially there is the get service, and here we're trying to say that install app flow, but it needs a secret. Where do you get a secret from? You say from client secrets file. So install app flow, we import that from here, Google auth oauth-lib.flow, import install app flow, and then from here you call from client secrets file, and then this will create a flow instance from a Google client secrets file. And this flow is where the person would authenticate. And this person is gonna, whoever the end user is gonna go in there and authorize the access to that person's own channel. All right. So install app flow from client secret file, you put in here, and it gives you a scope. This is a scope. We just want to read only. We're never gonna write to the service. We're just gonna read from the service. So this is safe for the client, right? The client can give you access and not have to worry that you're gonna post nonsense on the person's channel, or write nonsense comments on the person's channel. So you only have read-only access, not a write access. And then from there, it says credentials. Credentials is going to run the flow and then going to run console. That is going to cost later when we run this script. You will see that it will pop up a browser asking us to log in and authenticate and to authorize that, give permission to the application to access that information. And then we're going to return a build. This is something that we import from here. Google API Client Discovery. This is something that we're going to use later as well. But here it asks for the service name. And again, this is just YouTube analytics, because the build itself, there's a lot of other things you can do. You don't only just want to use YouTube. You can have all kind of services. I showed you earlier, there's the machine learning service, all of that stuff. Then API version is going to be V2, and then credentials is just going to be whatever it is that the user have authenticated from here. And then after, you have the execute API request. And then now let's go ahead and do our familiar if name print, right? If name equals to main. And now let's initialize the service. So we're going to call YouTube analytics. And this is going to just call the get service, right? So we're going to say get service like this. And then we're going to have our result equals to, and then here this result is where we're going to execute this, and then whatever it is that the result is going to be, we just saved it back to result, right? So we say execute API request, and remember there is the client library function, and then all the other stuff goes into the keyword arguments. So this API request, we're going to use the YouTube analytics, and we're going to say reports. Okay, where did I get these reports from? Now, if you open up the documentation, you can read all the different reports here, the data model. You can read about the overview. There is the analytics API. There is also an API reference. If you want to click on that, you can see the report retrieval. There's the reports.query, authorization. That's exactly what we're doing here. So you see up here we have the YouTube analytics.read only. So this is view YouTube analytics report for your YouTube content. This code provides access to user activity metric like view counts and rating counts. And this is what we're using. So therefore, there's the scopes. It's right in here. And then we're gonna have our reports.query. It says that this will now require the authenticate YouTube read-only scope. Okay, and there are a ton of things you can see from here, but I kind of know what I want already. But if you want to look at that, you can click on the overview, and there are things like start date, end date metrics. We're gonna use some of them. So if you want to, you can just keep it somewhere on the side, and we're gonna use some of them and mix and match them, right? So here I'm gonna say .query. And then remember we see the start date and end date. We're gonna try to use that as well. So we're gonna have something like start date. I want to take the data, and I'm gonna put in the date for, let's say 2020. All right, 0101, and then I'm gonna put the end of April 30th. All right, so end date. And again, all of this stuff are pretty well documented. They can be quite a lot of them, so it can be quite intimidating, but I'm just gonna use a few of them, right? So I'm just gonna say, give me my reports on start date 2020, so between these 2 days. All right, so I'm gonna say end date, and here I will have 2020 second 0430. So that's the 30th of April. And what about the IDs itself? So I can have my IDs. So let me show you what I mean. All right, so here, this is an ID. I could type in a random YouTube user ID and I can see, okay, what's gonna happen in there. But really, this is not what we meant to do anyway. So when I change that, and we want to set that is channel equals to mine. And in a way, when we do that, let me see if this is also already in documentation. So you see that there's channel equals to mine. The API returns data for the authenticated user's YouTube channel. Channel equals channel ID. Channel equal mine, right? So this is kind of like you're trying to tell the API that, hey, return the reports on my channel, and channel equals to mine. That's really what it is. So we have the channel, we have the YouTube ID, start date, end date. By now we should be good enough, but let's also go back to the earlier one, and I want to show you the metrics itself. So I'm going to search for metrics. There are the metrics. There is the core metrics. So these are things that you can find: command, average, likes, dislikes, and all kind of things here. All right. So suppose I want a few of this, right? Suppose I want a few of them. So I would take maybe the views. I would take the views. I will take the likes. I will take the subscribers gain. That's kind of important. And you can also scroll the way down, and you can also look at other stuff here that are not in there in the core. There are playlist metrics as well. There's annotation, there's cut metrics, there's a ton of things here. So you pick the ones you want, and I'm just gonna, I know what I want already because I've already done this experiment before. So I'm gonna just pass in metrics equals to, and I'm gonna just copy and paste to not waste your time. And then finally, let me take a look at dimensions. So there are dimensions here. So let me click on dimensions, and here there's the dimensions. You can say like age group, channel ID, country code, and you can have video ID. So this is how you want to slice the data by. You can also slice the data by time periods. For example, you can have date. So date sounds like it's something that makes sense to me. So I'm gonna use that one. So I'm gonna just say dimensions, and I'm gonna have day. And you can also optionally pass in a sorting. You can say, how do you want to sort this result that is returned to you? And I want to sort this by day. It makes sense as well. So I'm going to say day. All right. And finally, I'm just going to go ahead and print out all of that result and save it. Now, I will need to just call YouTube underscore off.py. So I'm going to say Python YouTube off.py. And it's gonna say, okay, please visit this URL to authorize the application. Fine, I'm gonna copy off that. And I'm gonna go into my browser. Paste it in. And it's gonna ask you to sign in with an account. So I have my account. This is my main account, so I'm gonna click on that. And remember, we see this YouTube Analytics API demo. That's the name we give it to the application. If you're building this as a SaaS, software as a service, you want to make sure this name is gonna you don't want to put demo or anything like that in here, right? And then you want to say it's view YouTube Analytics report for YouTube content. You can click on information. It says here what are the information what are the access that it needs, right? And if you access that, if you trust it, so bring it up a little bit. So it says here, make sure that you trust YouTube Analytics API demo. So this is the name of your app. This is not asking you to trust YouTube. It's asking you to trust the name of the service that you're providing as a SaaS, whatever, right? And it says that you may be sharing sensitive information with this site or app. You can always see or remove access. So if you're happy with that, you can click on allow, right? And I'm going to do that. So I'm going to click allow. And now it's going to say that, okay, make sure you trust. It's pretty paranoid here. So it says that if you trust it, then copy the authorization code from the authorization code section, navigate to YouTube Analytics API demo, and paste the authorization code. All right, so we're going to copy that right here. And we're going to come back into our terminal on the Visual Studio Code, and we're going to paste that right in. And you want to hit enter. And bam, now it's showing. So you just succeed. But let's make it a little bit prettier because right now it's pretty ugly. So there are a few ways we can do that. If you watch my other video, I'll link it somewhere in the description or somewhere on how to create table and format off this nicely, building an API project or tool. Then you know how to do this already, but I'm gonna just give it to you here. This is something that I covered in other videos. If you wonder where does this come from and stuff, I have a video. I have a whole series, in fact, talking about building Python tools and stuff. This is in there. So I'm gonna just use create table to format that. And then from here, I'm gonna, since this is the matrix, I'm gonna copy the header. And in here, I'm just gonna go ahead and create table. So no longer need to print result, but I'm gonna just call create table, which is the helper function that is up here. I mean, if you start to build out a SaaS, you probably want to move all of this out into its own file, helper function, utils.py or something. But here, we're just gonna keep it simple. Now, if I take a look at this data, it goes all the way up to 2020 at the top. Let me scroll. Okay. And this is kind of a dictionary, and in the dictionary there is a few keys, right? There's the kind keys, column headers, column type, and name, and now there's rows. So what we really want is we want this in here, right? And this is under the rows key. I know this is a little bit small. I'm gonna zoom in when I edit this. So what I want is I want a result, but I specifically want only this part of it. So I'm gonna say take results, and what do we name it? Result or results? Result. All right. And then we're gonna call it key. We're gonna say, okay, access the not key but rows. So the key name called rows, right? And in our headers function, this is the table, but then there's optionally you can pass a header. If you pass a header, it's gonna print a header. So to see things better, we're gonna change this to 2022 instead. So it's just, we can see the whole thing instead of having to scroll like that, right? So here I'm gonna call it headers equals to headers, right? And if I save this, scroll all the way down, and go ahead and do that again, it's gonna ask me to re-authenticate. So let me do that. Pass it in. Click on my account. Do you want to access? Yes. Allow. Make sure you trust. Sure. Copy. Come back in here. Enter authorization code. Click enter. And now we have a nicely formatted table. And this goes all the way from the top: date, minutes watched, views, likes, subscribers gained. Right? If you want this to be even prettier, you can then import an extra library called tabulate, and you can do that as well. So let me show you another way to do that is to go up here, and from this you can say from tabulate import tabulate. Now I think you may have to install that, so let me go ahead and do it real quick. Tabulate, run that. Okay, done. Clear the screen. And now that I have tabulate installed, I could go ahead and reload this real quick. Now I wouldn't need to create table anymore. I could just go ahead and say print tabulate, and I will pass in exactly the same thing. So result rows, headers equals to headers. And you can optionally pass a table format if you want a table format. So for example, you can have the pretty format. I think there's also GitHub table format. All of these are in my other videos. So if you want to learn more about that, go and find those videos and do that. But I'm not going to do it now. I'm just going to just say print tabulate. Okay, let's go ahead and do it again. So let's say Python YouTube off.py. Okay, take this. It's a bit of trouble, but we need to do that just to be secured, you know, making sure that we're not giving data to anyone can access our stuff. Copy that, paste it back in here, enter, and now we have a nicely formatted table. And now you can see there's a date, estimated minutes watched, views, likes, subscribers gained. So you can see that in the first half of this year, or at least in the first 3 months of the year, I'm not really doing anything, so I have like no subscribers gained. And then in the last few weeks, I've been regularly posting, so you see like one or two typically. All right, and that's kind of it. That's kind of the flow of using the OAuth. And if you want to start to bring in some tools to visualize that, to make a curve, you know, make it pretty and stuff, you can absolutely do that. I'm not going to worry about that because I want to show you the second part of this tutorial, and which is to go, and let me go back to my Google library. All right, so here. So earlier we used the analytics API, and that retrieved your YouTube analytics data, right? Now, what if you just want to use the YouTube data API where you say that, hey, I want to see, for example, if I search for the word smart contract programming, right? I want to see what kind of results get returned to me if I were to put this search query into the search bar. So those are things you can access from YouTube data API. You can also find out like how many subscribers are there for a channel. Those are also public information. So again, you can use those. And that is that is kind of a better fit for that kind of use cases rather than YouTube Analytics API, because that doesn't require the end user to authorize and to authenticate giving you access to the channel. So YouTube data API is kind of like anything that is public, you know, those things you can query for that. So let me show you how to do that, right? So let me click on that now. And again, when you first click on YouTube data API v3, just like how you were using Analytics API, it would ask you to activate. And when you click on data API, it would also, when you first launch it, it will ask you to enable that. So I already enabled that for this demo. So I would only see manage, but for you, you will see an enable. So click on that. And then once you click enable, or when you click manage, then you come into this screen, very similar screen. And here, what we're going to do is we're going to go into credentials, and we're going to say create credentials. And then here, I'm going to put API key. So I'm not going to say OAuth anymore. There are two choices here. It would ask you, it says that if you don't know which one to use, there is an option to say, help me choose. I have never used this, but I've used both of this. So earlier we said OAuth client ID. This requests user consent so your app can access the user's data. And then now we're going to use API key. This identifies your project to check quota. So YouTube is going to give you a few thousands of API calls. So per month you can make a few thousands API calls, but anything more than that is going to try to ask you to put in a credit card and start to do billing. But for now, for this project, you won't have to do any of that. So just go ahead, create an API key. This is really straightforward. It says use this key in your application by passing it with the key equals to API key parameter. So we want to copy all of this, copy that, hop back into our Visual Studio Code. So I'm gonna shrink this down now. And you probably want to install .env. Okay, I believe it's not spelled correctly. You want to say pip install python.env. Okay, done. Now we're gonna clear the screen and want to go ahead and just create a .env file. And then this, you can name it anything. I just name it API key to be quite clear what it's doing. And I'm gonna copy that. Paste it in here. Don't try to copy my API key, because after the demo, after the recording, I'm gonna delete all of this anyway, right? So don't actually go in there and try to create your own API key and not try to just copy it, right? You see from the screen. I'm gonna save that, close it out now. And remember how I told you you never want to have your env appearing. You don't want to have your secrets appearing anywhere in the Python script. You don't want to actually be putting your values in here. You don't want to actually have something like take this and then, oh, where's the credentials? So here, take this and then put something like that. You don't want to do that, okay? So want to separate the whatever is supposed to be a environment variable. You want to put them in an environment variable file called .env, and then immediately go and create a git ignore file, and then add the .env right away, like this. Then now you're not gonna accidentally commit that onto GitHub, right? So that's cool. Let's go ahead and create a new file as well, and we're gonna call it YouTube. We're gonna say public. So the first one is the authentication flow. This one will not have the authentication flow. It's just gonna have what did I miss out here? Okay, save this. In the YouTube public, because we're gonna load this value in here, and the way we do that is we're gonna say something like from.env import load.env, and then here we just have to call that, and now it's gonna be available by calling import os. Then we say API key equals to os get env, and then we say API key. Did I spell that correctly anyway? Yes, API key. So API key, right? So this is the simple 4-liner to sort of load that in. If you want to go ahead and just print the API key, you will see the results in there already. So let me say API, and let me just go and say Python YouTube public .py, and now I see that. All right, so this is kind of just a 4-liner, import os so that I can use os get env, and then from .env import load.env so that I can run the load.env. This is kind of what loads everything that it finds from here, and then within this, whatever it is, whatever the value is here, right, I just want to take that and then name it something else. You can name it something else. You can name it like YouTube key or something, but for me, I'm just gonna call it API key. And then remember I told you the build thing is something we're gonna use, this one. So we're gonna copy that in here as well, and I'm gonna put this in here. So as a convention, I like to put everything that is in the standard library up at the top, and then this one is not part of that standard library, so I'm gonna put them in following that. And then now we can build our query. So let's go ahead and say query, and we're gonna say build, because build is where we import from. This is what we import from. And if you look at build here, we have the build, and then we have the API service name, right? Here we use YouTube Analytics. Now we're gonna use the YouTube itself. Earlier we used the YouTube Analytics API. Now we're gonna be using the data API, right? So you can also make them a separate sort of a variable up there, and then just import that, or we can just hard code it. For now, it's because it's so simple anyway, we're just gonna hard code it. Okay, so YouTube API, and we're gonna be using the v3 version, the version 3. And the reason I'm going to be using YouTube version 3, the version 3 API, is because in the browser here, if you realize I have the v3 open up here, this is version 3. I want to be able to just refer to this documentation and pass the values in here. And plus, this is the most updated anyway. If you're watching this in May 2022, this is probably 2022. This is probably the most updated one anyway. So I'm going to be using that. So we're going to say v3, and now it needs a developer key. So this developer key, we got it from here. So let's bring this down. We don't need the print anymore, and we don't need this anymore. All right, so something like here, something like this, and we take that API key and we pass this in here. And then from this, now we go back to our browser and we want to find something that we are interested in. So let me try to shrink it up, bring it up a little bit, maybe like this. I apologize if it's if it's too small, but let's try to use the search. Returns the search resource. So I'm gonna use the search here, and search here, there's a documentation, so you can also right click, open in new tab. That's that, but I'm gonna just call search first. So search, and then what else is in search? Within search, you have a few other things you can do. You can close, you can list next. So among close, list next, which is most meaningful? Probably list. So I want to use the list. And here I will see a couple of things here. I see that there are a few arguments I can pass into this list. There are like parts, and this is a string. It says the part parameter specifies a comma separated list of one or more search resource properties at the API response. So I can try and ask for specific resource to be returned to me. So in my case, what I want is when you search for something on YouTube, let me show you that, right? When you search for something like React Web 3 tutorial, you have a ton of snippets, right? Those are snippets. So if you want to return a snippet, you can do so. And the way we do that, let me get into this. We're gonna say part equals to snippet. Whoops. And this is the part. And then you also have Q, which is here. Q is a string, it's a textual search terms to match. So what do we type here? We type React Web 3 tutorial. So that's gonna be Q. So you can do something like Q, and you can say React Web 3 tutorial, right? And you can also have, let's see, max results is also pretty interesting. It says integer, the max results parameter specifies the maximum number of items that should be returned in a result set. All right, so let's also use that. So we don't have to return a whole chunk. We just have to maybe say 10 of them, right? So let's say 10. And if you want to, you could just execute all of that. And then finally, you just have to say response equals to query, which is what we have here, and we say get. Because I'll tell you why that is. Because if you take the query and you just print that out, actually, you know what's better is we say response equals to query execute. Then we say print response like this, right? And if we run that now, let's see. Okay, so we have all of the results coming back to us. You see that there's a description, you see there's a title, you see there's a default, there's a thumbnail, there's a URL, and if you click onto one of them, it opens that up, and you will see the web3.js tutorial project, so on and so forth, right? There's all kind of stuff here. But you will also find my channel, Samo-chan. So you find my channel, and then you will also see that there is a URL here. If you copy that, you paste it in, you will see the nice banner image there, right? I'm not a graphic designer, but I don't think my art is too shabby, so it's not too bad. It's not the worst, all right? It's not the worst. Let's just keep it there. Okay, so now that there is there, I see that all the results are returned, and I have 10 of them, and I'm pretty happy, all right? So let's go ahead and try another one. We can keep the query and response. I think we can maybe, instead of, we could say, let's say, define search result, and we put a query term, and just have to tap all of this in there. And so then we just have to call the function. Query is gonna just be query. But by the way, if you wonder, what else can you do here? There's a lot, right? You can see, like, for example, you can have date. You say that resources are sorted in this. You can also change that. You don't want this to be sorted by date. You can sort it by rating. You can sort it by relevance. This is the default. So the default value, if you did not specify anything, but if you want to, you can change them. You can say, well, I want to order them in a separate way. You can do that, right? But I won't have time to go through all of them, but I want to just point you to this. So let me copy this and paste this in here, so you can sort of refer to this documentation, right? So being a very nice helpful function to you. And then there are like there are things like for mine as well. This is only for private videos of the authenticated user, so that's not useful. Location, field on location of the video. There's event type, publish after, publish before, region code. So there's a lot of other options here that you can just plug and play and just change this search result. I'm going to put all of this on the GitHub anyway. So just go and fork it and change those things. Try to open this up on a separate browser and try and make sure that you're very familiar with the flow here, right? I'm not going to have time to go through all of that, unfortunately, because I want to show you another thing, okay? So the other thing I want to show you is, let me build another one. Let me say this one, I want to return a channel. So I want to say return channel. So I'm going to say channel stats, okay? And again, I'm going to have query. Or actually, I'm going to say channel ID. And now I'm going to call that and say channel stats. And maybe print that as the response equals to channel stats. And I'm going to print response. All right, cool. So it's a very similar thing here. I'm going to have query here. And I'm going to follow the same thing up here. So I'm going to say build using the same API service. So YouTube and also V3. Okay, and I also need a developer key, so I'm gonna say that's the same. Okay, API key. So very similar stuff up here. Then I'm gonna build my request. So request. So here I just chain everything together. Here I just separate them out a little bit. I'm gonna say query. If you want to chain them, you can just go in here and just chain them, right? But within query itself, so let me go back to the documentation. There are other things you can query from. So for example, this one is the one I want here. I want to return the channels, resource. So let me click on that. Open in a new tab and copy that, and now use this as a doc string. So when I say use this as a doc string, refer to the documentation as well, and paste this in. And now I'm gonna have request query. So because this is channel, so I'm gonna call channels. And what do I have here? I have close, list next, and update. So which one makes the most sense? Do I want to close? Do I want to list? Do I want to list next? Or do I want to update? Well, in this case here, list makes the most sense as well. So I'm going to say list, right? I mean, depending on what you want to do here, right? There's no real answer, no real clear answer here. But what I want is to retrieve a list of resources, possibly filtered. This is exactly what I want. I don't care about updating. I don't care about listing the next page of results. I just want to list this, and I want to see a couple of things potentially, right? And from there, I'm going to tap that down and I'm going to say part. Okay, so this is the same thing up here. There is a snippet, but now I don't want to take the snippets anymore. What I want to do is I want to take the statistics. So I'm going to say return the statistics, and then here I could pass in a for username. So I can pass in for username and I can pass in my username on GitHub. But username itself is pretty fickle. If you see that my channel is actually called Samuel Chan, but you would think that, oh, Samuel Chan must be your ID, but it's not really. In fact, if I click onto YouTube Studio and if I go into Samuel Chan, I won't get that. So this is actually the right one, right? So I'm gonna have to copy this and copy that, and then I'm gonna pass that in here. So I'm gonna say ID equals to this. The irony of that is that it ends with a bug. All right. And I think this is good enough. Do I need anything else? Let me see. There's part, there's category ID, returns the channel within the specified guide category ID. So you want to say return a channel if I give you this category ID. Maybe the category ID is maybe something like education, for example, entertainment. I'm not going to use that. For username, if you use this, then you don't need the ID. But since I did not use the for username, I used the ID, then it just returned a channel with the specified ID. And then there is also managed by me. There's also the mine, again, what we talk about, my subscribers. All right, I don't think anything else is important, actually. I don't think anything else is really that important. But it returns a couple of things. And let's go ahead and just ask it to return first. Okay, so let's go ahead now and say response request.execute. And we're going to just print response. Oops, actually, did we have that already? Oh, yeah, we do. So we don't even need this no more. We could also save some typing here. The request, we save that into response and we print the response. So let's run all of this. Okay, it needs a channel ID. So this is because we parameterized that already. So let's copy that, paste it here. Then this would just be channel ID. Clean and atomic, and run that. Okay, because we didn't return anything, so let's go ahead and return. All right, now it's working. So there is the e tag, page info, total results is 1, and I will see my items, YouTube channel, that's correct, and then the statistics, view count, I have 40,000 views, and then subscriber count, I have 562, and then I have a video count 54. All right, that's mine. And that is kind of how you would use a public, that is kind of how you use the YouTube data API, right? So let's summarize that a little bit, all right, before we end the video. So we start off by using YouTube Analytics API. It supports real-time targeted queries. This allows you to generate custom YouTube Analytics report, and it allows you to build a service where anyone of your user, maybe you build a SaaS, software as a service, anyone could go in there, authenticate, and say, okay, I authorize you to go and get the data related to associated with my channel. So those includes any kind of private data, things like, maybe the comments that you hidden, or any things that you flag, or things like private unpublished videos. All of those things are going to be returned if you make the query. So YouTube Analytics API is really suitable for that kind of task. You can retrieve them, and you don't also have to build your own filtering process, because here the API you can use that to specify the date range for which data will be returned, allows you to retrieve weekly, monthly data sets. And so you don't have to store them and then try to aggregate them using a SQLite in the backend. You can actually have all of those returned by the Analytics API. And then the other thing that we tried is the YouTube Data API. And YouTube Data API, it gives you resources to activity, channel banner, and so on and so forth. That's that. And then the supported operations, supported operations, you will see that just now when we keep using the list, but you can also do insert, update, delete. So provided that you have the authorization, right? But for example, you see that there is no update or delete in any of these rows, but then you can do update and delete, for example, comment thread or things like playlist, right? And then there is a quota usage. This is why you need an API, because it gives you 10,000 units per day. And how do you calculate what is a unit? That's something that it describes in here. So a read operation that retrieve a list of resources usually costs 1 unit. Search request will cost 100 units. A video upload costs 1,600 units. So there are all of these things that you need to take into consideration when you're building out a service like that. But that's kind of it. We cover pretty much the two main approaches. One is to go through the OAuth authentication, and the other one goes through an API key. So make sure that before you commit this, make sure that it's in the git ignore, the .env, as well as this one. You also want to add this to git ignore. So if you do a git init here, now you see that this is already ignored, right? So you also want to ignore this one. You want to say take this one and add to git ignore. So both of these files are git ignored. In fact, almost anything that is under JSON, you should assume that's a I just want to be very safe and say any keys that I stored under JSON, just assume that's a private key unless otherwise specified, right? So with that, I have the two of my Python file. So for you, your homework would be to just fork the repository and try and play around with the different things you see in the video and try and change those things. There are documentation that I linked to here. You can go and take a look at that, refer to that, and see what kind of interesting insights come out of it. Of course, if you don't have a YouTube channel, then you probably don't have a lot to experiment with, for at least on the first half, the YouTube analytics demo. But if you don't have a YouTube channel, that doesn't stop you from trying out the public one anyway. You could use that on you can use that on my channel and tell me what kind of insights you find. How do you think I could improve as a YouTuber, right? And I think that's about it. I think that's where I'll leave you at. So you go and have a nice day. I'll catch you in the next video.